The interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress. The veteran's name is Mike Giebner. He was born on April 24, 1965, and served in the Air Force during the Gulf War. He achieved the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. We are recording this on May 1st, 2013. I am Heidi Gerstmyer, and I am conducting the interview. No relation. So can you tell us where you grew up?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Columbia, South Carolina, so not too far from here.
And you came to Clemson after that?
Well, not directly.
Right.
I mean, I went to high school and was a very average student, so not studious. And I graduated from high school right smack in the middle of my class because I was a very apathetic student, but I'm reasonably intelligent, so I was able to just kind of get through. And I went to college because I thought that's what everybody was supposed to do, and it didn't go so well. So I went to college for a year and bombed out spectacularly. I mean, spectacularly. So after a year, I went back home to Columbia and was just kind of working and running around with my friends and just making a general nuisance of myself. And after a particular incident, out at the drive-in with all of my friends hanging out on a Sunday night, my dad got in the car and it smelled like alcohol and all this stuff. And so he basically got real upset and told me I had to go do something or he's going to kill me. Basically, he's just mad. So I joined the Air Force the next day. I enlisted in the Air Force and went off in the Air Force as an Airman Basic, which is the lowest rank in the Air Force or in the military. I was an E1. So I did that for a while. It was funny because I left from Columbia, South Carolina and was stationed back in Charleston, South Carolina, so 100 miles away, as an electronic technician on a digital flight simulator, which is like a giant video game. So I did that for 4 years and 8 months as an enlisted guy. And then I transitioned from active duty to the Air Force Reserves as a enlisted crew member. So they sent me off to be a flight engineer in C-141B Starlifters, which is a strategic airlift aircraft that we don't fly anymore. So I got fully qualified in that, and that's when basically the Gulf War kicked off, was in 1990. So I had just gotten fully qualified as an aircrew member and came to Clemson in 1990 as a freshman, and that's when, and then like December or January, whatever, the war kicked off. And so I was actually a brand new student at Clemson when that happened, but I was flying out of Charleston. So actually an interesting story was, the war was kind of going on, and I was a student here, and so I left here on a Thursday night. I skipped classes on Friday, and so I left on Thursday night, drove to Charleston. We picked up an airplane on Friday morning, flew it to Spain, gave the airplane to another crew. It was called the Desert Express, where we would take cargo from the United States and get it to Saudi Arabia inside 24 hours. So we picked it up in Charleston, flew it to Spain. A crew met us at the airplane while we were getting gas on it. We turned the airplane over to them and told them, what was wrong with it, which was basically nothing, so they didn't have to pre-flight it or anything. They just jumped in the airplane. They flew it to Saudi Arabia, dumped the cargo off, got gas, came back. We went to bed and then met them the next morning and picked up the airplane from them, flew it back to Charleston, and I drove back to Clemson Sunday night and was in class on Monday morning, which was kind of an interesting way to spend the weekend. And my friends were like, hey, what'd you do this weekend? And we were out partying. I was like, I went to Spain and back, as part of the war effort, so it was kind of an interesting thing.
It's quite the freshman year.
It was it was quite the freshman year. And I was 24 when I came back here as a freshman. So I was a pretty focused student at that point. So I was in the electrical engineering degree program, so you got to be focused over there or things don't go very well. So so I did that. I flew the whole time I was at Clemson. Being in the reserves, they took great care of me. I could call up on break and say, or summer, and say, hey, it's Christmas break, I've got 3 weeks off, I need to fly, and they'd send me to Germany for 2 weeks. And I would fly that whole time, and so I get paid for 2 weeks worth of work, and I get paid travel, and I get to spend 2 weeks just out flying around Europe or something. So it helped me pay my bills. It was just kind of an interesting thing to do too.
And what would these flying jobs entail? Like what exactly were you doing?
Picking up cargo and people and taking them from point A to point B, wherever that was. And we'd go to Africa, we'd go to Europe, we'd go to South America, Central America, wherever they needed us to go. You know, so we were just kind of all over the place. I didn't really go to the Far East much, or Japan, or Australia, or anything like that. We were mostly Europe, and then South America, Central America, and North America, mostly. But I did get to see a ton of the world, you know, while I was in college. I mean, so that was a lot of fun.
Would you travel or like take some trips while you were doing these, or was it just business?
It was mostly business. We usually didn't have time, and we would land somewhere, and we typically, the fastest they could turn us around if we had to spend the night to get some sleep was 15 hours and 15 minutes. It's called 15-15. So you'd land, and you'd walk away from the airplane, so 15 hours and 15 minutes later, you were showing back up at the airplane to leave. So you could kind of do some sightseeing, but you had to get 8 hours of sleep in there too, or whatever. So it typically, you couldn't do a ton, but you could go in, and we'd go to Frankfurt and go into town and see Frankfurt, or wherever, you know. So mostly consisted of going drinking beer and stuff like that. So, but it was a really great way to go through college, you know, and help pay the bills and stuff.
So had you thought about doing the Air Force before that day that your dad told you to?
Well, I thought about doing the military some. I talked to the Marine recruiter and stuff like that, and just, you know, it was a thought that, you know, that never really went far. And I had friends in the Air Force, and I think that resonated with me a little more just because you know, it's the service that's probably closest to, you know, being a civilian than the others, you know, and I wanted to do something in like electronics or something really technical, and that's what the Air Force does, you know, without me having to go carry a rifle and go march around the woods or something. I mean, I didn't really want to go be a soldier, you know, so.
Did you have family that served also?
I did. My uncle was in the Air Force and was retired as an enlisted guy, and then was my mom's twin brother, and my dad's brother was a helicopter pilot in the Army, and he flew in Vietnam, he flew in let's see, the Gulf War, and he flew in Afghanistan and Iraq, so he flew in like a million different wars and over 30 years. So he was a pretty highly decorated combat pilot. So
you continued traveling throughout Clemson, and after Clemson, where'd you go? Well,
when I graduated, you know, I'd been an enlisted guy, and I'd seen some of the officers, and I was thinking, there were a couple of them that weren't the best officers, and that kind of made me think, you know, if that knucklehead can do this, I can do this. So I put that thought in my head. I was like, well, I'll just apply. I've been in the Air Force at that time for 8 or 9 years, and I was like, well, I'll just go do that. And so I applied for officer training school and was selected to go, and so I did. I went from here to Montgomery, Alabama, Maxwell Air Force Base, which is where officer training school moved to, and I was like the third class that was there because they used to be in Texas. And so I went through officer training school there and was sent to Las Vegas, Nevada after that, which is kind of weird because I'm a developmental engineer, which means, you know, I help buy and build and test airplanes and missiles and things, and this kind of largely can be a desk job or whatever. And they sent me to the home with a fighter pilot, and I didn't even know, you know, that I could go there. And it was the luck of the draw, and that was actually the beginning of a pretty happy chain of events, I guess, because I got out there and I was put in in the test group, which had one squadron in it. And we had probably 30 airplanes of about 5 or 6 different kinds, and I was put in the F-16 division. And so I was there for about 6 months, and I replaced this captain, and he was kind of a slacker a little bit, and he always wanted to fly as an engineer, and they wouldn't let him because he was kind of a slacker. And so I showed up, and I wasn't a slacker. I worked pretty hard. And so I asked my boss, who was a lieutenant colonel, and I said, hey, can I, fly? I want to fly. And it's like, because I've been working hard, he's like, well, let me see. So they actually had a pilot slot that didn't have a pilot in it. It was empty, and it was a non-flying spot, and no pilot wants to fill a non-flying job, so he couldn't fill it. So he traded that job to the Air Force Personnel Center to get my job turned into a flying spot. He said, hey, I got this empty pilot's billet with nobody in it. Can I trade you that billet if you'll X-code my engineer's position, which in X-code means I can fly. So I spent the next 3.5 years flying, you know, anytime I wanted to. So we had 13 F-16s and 7 of them were two-seaters. So I could sit in the back any day I felt like it. So I just got real lucky. And I worked with all the pilots, so I knew them really well. And if I felt like flying, I could just go out and put my name on the flying schedule and go fly.
And this flying was the test planes or recreational?
It was test airplanes, F-16s. So, you know, I mean, the first flight I ever took, we were pulling 9 Gs. And I'd never been in the centrifuge, so I hadn't been trained. And, you know, they showed me how to do the straining maneuvers so that I wouldn't pass out. But that was it. They're like, there's your training. And, you know, they showed me how to egress the airplane with the ejection seat and all that stuff I needed to. But normally the pilots, they have to go through the centrifuge for like 2 or 3 days. I didn't do any of that. They just threw me in the back and like, oh, try to stay awake.
Good luck.
You know, yeah, good luck. And so it was a lot of fun. So I spent 3.5 years flying anytime I felt like it. Yeah, so it was a great deal. And it was just pure luck. You know, it was just luck of the draw that I got that job. Yeah, so I got a lot of really great experience because all the guys I flew with, almost all of them were weapons school graduates, and weapons school is the equivalent of Navy Top Gun, except it's better because it's longer and harder. So these guys are all really, really good fighter pilots. So I got to fly with them and see inside their world, you know, as an engineer, and it was a really neat experience. You know, to just kind of learn what they were doing and why they did it and how they did it. It was a lot of fun.
So what made you leave that area?
Well, because our assignments are 3 to 4 years, and so at a set time you have to leave, and so I had to leave. I spent 4 years there, which was, you know, pretty lucky. And I went from there to Florida to a ground test job, which I hated. And but while I was there, I applied to go to test pilot school, and that job in Las Vegas is one of the things that helped me because I had, you know, 160 hours of military flight experience at that point, and in testing airplanes. So when I applied to go to test pilot school, that really helped me a lot, I think.
And as you got into test pilot school?
I did. As an engineer, I applied for that. I didn't have my master's degree at the time. I was about halfway through. And normally they want you to have your master's degree, but as part of the application process for test pilot school, there's a little block on the form that you can check that says you're a volunteer for graduate school, because they have 3 spots a year at our Air Force has their own graduate school, and it's reserved for pilots. And they're supposed to go there, get their master's, then go to test pilot school. And they set that up because it's really hard for pilots to get their master's degree because they're all flying so much and deploying and things like that. So if there are 3 pilots that want to go through that to test pilot school, but they apply to go to AFIT first. AFIT's the graduate school. It stands for Air Force Institute of Technology. Well, the year I applied, only 2 pilots were qualified. And so they were both aerodynamic or aero engineers. And I was in electrical, and they wanted an electrical too, but no pilot was qualified. So they asked the AFIT representative on the test pilot school selection board if they would take me, and he looked at my grades, and my grades here were really good, and my GRE scores, and he said, yeah, we'll take them. So I went and got a master's degree, and then went out to test pilot school for a year, and then stayed at, and that's at Edwards Air Force Base in California. And so spent 11 months in that school, and then graduated and went and worked on the F-22 flight test program.
And what did you do in that program?
I was a test conductor and a test director. So basically I was in charge of a test mission, which was centered around, you know, one test F-22 airplane, you know, about $300 million test aircraft or so, with a test pilot in it. And we'd have support airplanes like F-16s or so, and we'd have a tanker, so we could get gas, and we could, you know, so our test missions could last about 3 hours. We didn't have to come back and land to get gas. So I was in control of all those people, and a room full of engineers who were looking at data from that test airplane. So I did that for about 2 years, and that was actually a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing that. It was everything from just testing the avionics on the airplane, like the radar, some of the classified stuff, all the way to just testing the airplane itself. You know, how fast can it go? How high can it go? How many Gs can it pull? You know, just the tests of the basic aircraft itself, and that was typically some of the more dangerous stuff, and that was a lot of fun. I thoroughly enjoyed that job.
And where did that job take you?
What do you mean, where did it take me?
Like, where did you do this testing? Was it all in the States?
Yeah, it was all at Edwards Air Force Base,
okay.
at the Air Force Flight Test Center in the Mojave Desert, so which is a great place to work, not the best place to live, because it's in the Mojave Desert.
Okay.
But, I mean, you know, we could go supersonic right around the base, and, you know, if you crashed an airplane, you weren't going to hit anybody. And that's part of the reason why they're there.
Does that happen frequently?
It doesn't happen frequently, but it does happen. So, yeah, in probably the last 10 years, we've probably crashed 3 airplanes or something out there, or 4 or 5 or something. So, it's we make it as safe as we can, but occasionally something bad's going to happen. You know, and that's just the nature of military aviation. You know, something's going to happen. So.
And so after this, did you fly missions, or were you still
that was my last flying job. So I went from there to, I worked on the CB-22 tilt rotor aircraft program at Edwards for about 8 months, and then I left there at PCS, which means permanent change of station. I moved from Edwards, and then I went to Egland Air Force Base in Florida, where I worked a lot of classified programs as a program manager. So I moved over from the engineering side to more management, you know, was running the program or whatever, and that was mostly classified stuff. And I worked the Joint Strike Fighter program for about a year at the very end, which is the aircraft, the 5th generation fighter that's following on after the F-22. So it's in development right now.
So I realized it was classified, but what did that job entail? Like, what would you do as a manager?
Well, I'd work with, and I have to be careful here because this is being videotaped,
right.
But I mean, I would work with a contractor who we had hired to do whatever it was we were hiring to do. I mean, we were at the Air Armament Center, so it typically was weapons development. So we were trying to develop some type of new weapon or some type of new technology. And so I would work with the contractor as the government representative. They did the work, but they did it for me.
Right.
You know, and so I would monitor the contractual obligation, or the contract, and were they meeting their contractual obligations, were they giving me the things they're supposed to be giving me, were they doing it on time, you know. And part of it was just, hey, I know we paid you to go do this thing, what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Because some of it was you know, they're trying to invent something. Okay, did it work? How well did it work? Did it not work? Is there a promising path that we could go down, or whatever? You know, so it was pretty interesting work, but that work is typically all done by the contractor.
And did you have much contact with people overseas at all, or was it basically in the States?
No, it was mostly in the States. Yeah, mostly in the States.
And after this?
After that, I came here.
Right.
So I came back to my alma mater to teach ROTC. So.
And here with ROTC, you're the...
I'm the recruiter. I teach the freshman cadets, and I recruit the new students into the program.
All right. So where were you when the war ended?
I was here at Clemson still.
Did that have any impact on you?
The war itself, not really. I mean, I've been pretty lucky. I mean, you know, some people go through through things that really impact them. I mean, they could be scarred and things like that. And I've never really seen much of that. I mean, I've been insulated from a lot of the bad stuff, I guess, that happened. I mean, I've had friends that were killed in aircraft accidents and things like that, but it was never anybody real close. You know, knock on wood. I mean, they were friends, but it wasn't like that real giant emotional impact that some people would have. They weren't quite that close, you know. So I've been pretty lucky. I mean, over a 28-year career, I've probably known 4 or 5 people that were killed, you know, while they were serving. But I was a little removed from it, which is, I guess, a good thing for me.
So did you say that's how you felt while you were at those training camps also? You felt removed from the war? Or was it different while you were actually in training camps and the war was going on?
I mean, you know, it was never anything that I Like I flew into Saudi Arabia during the Gulf War. I mean, and it was a war zone, you know, and everybody was kind of nervous because we didn't know what was going to happen. It was pretty early on, and you know, Saddam Hussein was shooting Scud missiles, and you never knew when that was coming, and you didn't really know. I mean, it was an unknown environment, so it was kind of interesting. We were going, we were descending into King Fahd Air Base. I think it was King Fahd, but that's where we had a big air base. And we didn't really know what was going to happen, so we took our chemical warfare suits, because we had these suits, and we'd been trained on them. We'd never really worn them. We're like, well, maybe we better get these suits out. So we did, and but you have to, you know, the undergarment is a big charcoal suit, like the charcoal you cook your hamburgers on. It's a flight suit made out of charcoal, but it's kind of a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. So you had to take it out and then like size it, and you cut the sleeves so they would fit, and then you put that on. And then you put your flight suit on over it, and you put on chem boots and, you know, all these rubber gloves, and you tape stuff. And so we at least put on the charcoal undergarment.
What was the hope for that?
Well, it was in case they shot a Scud missile that had chemical weapons in it, we'd at least have the suit on.
That protects you?
Yeah, it would at least protect you somewhat.
Okay.
So we're landing in a desert in the summer, and we're wearing charcoal flight suits with a flight suit on top of it. It was a little hot. You know, it's just a weird thing, you know, because we're like, well, we better put them on. And it was a little bit of almost a Wild West kind of a feeling, because I mean, we were reserve guys. We didn't really know what was going on. So we had some illegal weapons with us. Like I had a little pistol that I wasn't supposed to have with me. One guy had a sawed-off shotgun in a little bag, you know, because we didn't know. He's like, well, I guess, you know, what are they going to do, send me to the war zone? And we wanted to have a weapon. So,
and they wouldn't give you?
What's that?
They wouldn't give you?
Well, I had a little 38, but I wanted another one, so I had another one. So I had two pistols, and this guy had a sawed-off shotgun, which was pretty strange, and he just carried around his little bag, and you know, nothing happened, but it was just kind of an interesting experience, you know. So we go back and get on the plane, nothing happened. We fly out, and we go take, you know, the flight suits off and take these charcoal flight suits off, and so now you got this black charcoal dust all over you from the suit.
Right.
You know, so it was just a little surrealistic, but it wasn't like, you know, I came back and needed to talk to a psychotherapist or anything.
Right.
It was just, well, I hope nothing bad happens, and nothing bad happened, you know, but I've been pretty lucky that way.
So how was it in Saudi Arabia? What do you see exactly?
I mean, we just land and, you know, dump our cargo, get gas, and leave, basically.
And you didn't see any conflict while you were there?
Nothing really, no. And part of the reason was, I mean, you know, because our airplane's big, there's no place to park it and leave it. They're like, come in, get rid of your stuff, get some gas, and leave. We don't have room for you. So it was pretty fast. So during the actual conflict, we were only on the ground for about 3 hours.
Did you talk to the people that you gave the cargo to?
Some, but they were just Americans. You know, so it wasn't like I met with any Saudis.
But how are they doing? In Saudi Arabia?
They were just busy.
Right.
They got the cargo, and it wasn't like, you know, a huge deal, to be honest with you. I mean, I spent 5 months in Iraq in 2006, and you know, which was a war zone at the time. But I spent 5 months in an armed camp, and I never met a single Iraqi. And I'm living, you know, on the outskirts of a city of millions of Iraqis, and I never met a single Iraqi. You know, so it was a kind of a weird experience, and it's because, I mean, you know, you didn't go into town; it was too dangerous. You know, the only people who went into town were armed combat patrols, and that wasn't my job. So, you know, I went into town once, and I did it in a helicopter, and so I left one armed camp, landed in another armed camp, did my business, and flew back. So it was kind of a weird experience.
Can you elaborate on your time in Iraq and what you did?
I worked, you know, similar things. I worked for the comptroller, and he was an Army colonel, and he worked directly for the chief of staff for the multinational corps of Iraq, who's an Army brigadier general. And that guy's part of his job was to pay the bills. So we paid the bills that came through Iraq, which turned out to be about $1 billion a month. $1 billion a month, you know, so it was pretty weird. So the generals, as a one-star, he had to pay the bills, and he didn't have a lot of control over those bills. He just sometimes had to pay them. You know, that's just the nature of the beast. And but he got tired of getting surprises. You know, people would go, well, I mean, he'd pay a bill, pay a contractor, and then they'd come back. Like we had one, and sometimes it really wasn't the contractor's fault, but we had a contractor, their job was to clean up the battlefields, old battlefields that had ordnance in them, because the insurgents were going and getting like old mortar shells or old, 155 millimeter shells and turning them into IEDs. And so we were having these contractors go out and try to find the battlefield, because you didn't even know where they were sometimes. Okay, here's a battlefield. Go get all the stuff.
They're not labeled.
You know, yeah, they're not labeled. And so they would go get it, and they'd have to provide their own security. And sometimes they're doing this cleaning up stuff, and they're getting shot at. Occasionally they get killed. And so it was a very ambiguous project to undertake. So they estimated how much it was going to cost them to do things, but we would have to go back to the same fields multiple times sometimes, because originally they were, okay, get the big shells, because that's what they were using. Well, then we started picking up all the big shells, so they'd use little shells or something. So go back to the same site, get the little shells, whatever. It was a big mess. And so, this contractor had been paid for just 1 year's worth of work, $200 million. And so they go in to meet with the general, because this is a big contract. He's like, I just want you to come talk to me and tell me how things are going. And they're like, oh, it's awesome, it's great, we're doing great, we love it, we've got money, and whatever. And at the end they walked out and they went, oh yeah, by the way, we were out of money, and I need another $100 million. And that made him a little upset. So what I did was I took those I was the guy who was in charge of some of those big projects, 30 of them. And so instead of the general meeting with them once a year, once every 6 months, I would meet with them like once a month and keep a track of how they were doing, so that if one of those big surprises was going to come up, like we're running out of money, it wasn't going to be a big surprise. We were going to know about it beforehand. And so I would monitor these 30 big contracts and how they were doing, so that the general didn't get any surprises. Yeah. So it was really kind of interesting.
Was there much you could do? Can you really tell them to stop?
No, and that really wasn't what I was there for. It was just to make sure things flowed smoothly and that he didn't get this big bill that he wasn't expecting. And just to keep an eye on them, because we had a helicopter maintenance contract, and it was it was a lot of money. And the guy who was running it, who was in charge of that, and so I didn't run it, he ran it. He was an Army Chief Warrant Officer 5, CW5. And so he was trying to run his program the best he could. So I got the estimate for the next year's contract, and it went up I remember all the details, but it went up like $65 million or something. And so that's where, me having some expertise dealing with these kind of programs, I'm like, all right, look, we got to figure out what's going on. Why do you need this money? And he gave me some story. And we finally, after asking a bunch of questions, he finally just came clean. He's like, look, I want to have some extra money in case something happens on my contract. I can get my job done. I can take care of fixing helicopters, which is a very important thing in a war zone. I'm like, that's all great, but if I give you the big chunk, then that money that's extra, you may not need it. If you don't need it, I can't use it somewhere else. So I was able to, tell them, look, I get the fact that you're trying to run your program really smartly, but I'm going to chop that, $65 million off the top and give you what you think you need. If you start getting to the point where you need that extra money, we just need to know about it ahead of time. We'll get you the money, but I can't just reserve it for you right now, because if I take that $65 million and give it to him, it's got to come from somewhere, and these other programs might suffer or get canceled or something, or at least it keeps the general from having to go to Congress and ask for $65 million that he doesn't really need, So that was the kind of thing that I was doing, because at the end of the year, you don't want, if he didn't need that money, it's a bad thing to have it sitting out there. It wasn't able to be used or whatever. So it's stuff like that. Yeah.
So how did you get this job from piloting?
Well, they needed somebody to do it. And, because the guy that was doing it before me, it was a 5-month deployment. His deployment was ending, so they're like, all right, who's we want somebody in the Air Force to do this job, because the Army was really being heavily taxed. And there people were tired. They're like, okay, we want some Air Force people to help too. And that was a job that I was qualified for. So they just, they basically do a rotation in the Air Force. They just say, all right, we need a program manager who's either a major or a lieutenant colonel. The next, the last people that had to give up somebody was from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So Egland Air Force Base, you're next. Give us a body. So that's really what they do. They tell the general down there, give me a major or lieutenant colonel program manager. He goes, all right, fine. So he goes to his base and he goes, well, the next organization on base who has to give up a person for deployment is this group. And that was my group. And
so it's completely random.
It's completely random. They go, you're next. Give me a major lieutenant colonel to deploy. And they go, all right. And on my group, there was only 3. There was me, there was my boss, and there was another person who was medically unqualified, which did not make me very happy. And my boss had already deployed, so they said we need somebody. So I didn't feel like it was fair. The medically disqualified person, she couldn't go. My boss had already deployed, so I felt like the only fair thing to do was to volunteer, because I didn't want to just sit back and wait and go, because they might have picked him, and I didn't feel like that was fair. I mean, he'd already been once, and I hadn't deployed yet, and other than when I was flying as an enlisted guy, so I felt like the right thing to do was just volunteer, so I did. So I got to spend a summer in Iraq, which is really hot.
I can imagine. So was it what you were expecting when you were there?
No, it was pretty weird. I mean, you live in a tent, it's air conditioned, but you live in a tent when you first get there, and then you get on the list for a hooch, which is a little trailer. I was only a major, so I just shared. I had a 2-person trailer that I shared with an Army guy, and but it wasn't so bad. I mean, you have a little bit of privacy. It's air conditioned. You have to walk out to go to the bathroom, which is 100 yards away, and take a shower and all that stuff. But it isn't the worst thing in the world. There's a lot worse conditions. Like this is, I tell this story a lot, because they weren't at headquarters. I mean, I worked. My ultimate boss was the commanding general of the multinational corps. I think he was a 3-star general. So we're at headquarters. Life's not that bad. There's violence around, but it's not in the camp really. Because I was at Camp Victory, which is huge, and so it's mostly open desert. So the insurgents didn't really lob mortars over the wall much, because it's mostly open desert. They do that. They don't hit anything. They just hit open desert. Mm-hmm. So instead of doing that, they would go after the green zone, which is where the embassy was, because that was in town. There's no open desert. You're going to hit something. So they lobbed stuff into there all the time. They left us alone. So I carried a gun for 5 months, but you just wander around and you go to work, and it's not really, the violence is outside the wall, pretty much. But so I'm at I'm at headquarters. So life's not bad. Food's pretty good. You can't get any alcohol, so no beer, which was bad. But other than that, you go to work. You work 12, 14 hours every day, Saturday, Sunday, every day. I worked 153 days in a row. And that's just the way it was. But I remember, you go to the gym, because you needed a break when you're working 14 hours a day. You wanted a break, so you typically went to the gym every day. So I go to the gym in the middle of the day, and I came back, and I was sweaty, so I was going to go take a shower. It was in the middle of the day. So, and in our LSA, which is life support area, which is where the hooches are, and it just means where you live, there was the shower, community shower. And so you had a tent where you undress and all that stuff, and it was air conditioned. And then the shower stall was not air conditioned. And the bladder for the water were the big giant bladders, thousands of gallons of whatever of water. And they're black, and they sit in the sun. So, black absorbs heat. So, the water's boiling hot. So I go in there, and, so I'm in the air-conditioned tent, and I get undressed, which is fine. Then I go into the un-air-conditioned shower stall, where it's about 145 degrees, and it is hot. And I turn on the water, and it is blistering, boiling hot from these black bladders outside. So I'm I scalded the hell out of myself. I'm like, you know, I mean, it hurt pretty good. So now I'm standing in the shower, kind of in the corner, and the water's going, because I'm waiting for it to cool off a little bit, get that top layer of water out of that bladder and get to where I can actually get wet. And I'm just pouring sweat. I mean, from every pore in my body, because it's 145 degrees in there. And I'm just standing there. I'm like, this sucks. I mean, this just sucks, you know, like, big deal. Or that's the lesson I learned out of it. And so I'm in the shower stall right next to the air-conditioned tent. I mean, they're right there. So I hear the tent slide open, you know, and these two guys stick their head through, and I look out, and it's these two Army guys. And the one guy looks at the other, he goes, man, this is sweet. And because they've been in a FOB somewhere, a forward operating base, you know, sleeping in a foxhole and not taking a shower for 2 months. Yeah, this is pretty sweet. And I was like, okay, you know, probably should stop bitching about the fact that the shower water's hot, you know, and that it's hot in here. So it was an interesting lesson. I was like, yeah, life at headquarters is not bad. You know, those guys had life crappy. Like my uncle at the time, he had been retired from the Army for like 10 years when all this happened. He was a helicopter pilot, and he was a highly decorated combat pilot. And so, you know, after 9/11, he decided, hey, you know, either he found the Army again or they found him, and they struck a deal. And they're like, look, you're a really experienced helicopter pilot. We want you to come back in the Army and be an instructor pilot. Here's the deal. We will not deploy you, but we won't promote you either. So no promotion, but we won't send you to combat zone. He's like, that sounds good. He was a Chief Warrant Officer 4. So he came back in the Army, and they promptly deployed him. So they lied to him. And they never promoted him. So they sent him to Afghanistan, where he flew combat in Apache helicopters. And then, so I go to Iraq in 2006, and he gets deployed to Iraq. He turns 61 years old in a forward operating base, a FOB Spider in Iraq. Yeah. So I'm at headquarters, and life's pretty good. He sent this picture where he had been walking to, like, from his little hooch to the chow place or whatever, and a sandstorm hit it, and he got caught in it. And he was completely, I mean, he looked like they dumped, you know, flour on him. And, you know, he was showing me a picture of his hooch, and it's like, yeah, I just turned 61.
Happy birthday.
That sucks. Yeah. Yeah. So it was a pretty interesting experience, but really, you know, I mean, I would walk past combat patrols who were gearing up and getting ready to go outside the wire, and you know, but I never had to do that other than flying in a helicopter that one time. It just, you know, it's life as usual, business as usual, because nothing bad happened. You know, I mean, it could have. I mean, there were helicopters that were getting shot down after I left, but at the time, you know, it wasn't happening. And I remember, you know, flying and looking out, and we're 500 feet over the city, and a pretty easy target, but nothing happened. You know, so it's really not a high stress kind of a thing, really, oddly enough.
Would you say the base environment was stressful, since there were those people getting ready to leave?
Not for me, you know, but for some people, yeah, it was very stressful. But we, you know, my job was running contracts. It just wasn't that stressful.
So you didn't have contact really with people that were in the Army about to get?
No, not really. They were off doing their own thing somewhere else, you know. So and we didn't really deal with them much, you know. It just didn't come in contact with that part of any of these wars, really.
And so when you moved, you just went to a similar base, like the first one you've been in?
Yeah. So it's just, it was never real stressful as far as combat goes. You know, and some of the stuff I've done is pretty dangerous, and some of the flying stuff is dangerous, but you don't focus on that. You're just thinking, man, this is fun. It's fun, it's interesting, you're just involved, and nothing bad happened. So you just never, you know, I've just been lucky. You know, very lucky.
And so after you left Iraq, you just came back to the States?
Yeah, I mean, it was not a huge deal. I mean, they obviously are worried because some people have issues when they come back. Mm-hmm. You know, they ask you all that stuff. Did you ever have this? Did you ever see a dead body? Did you this, that? And I'm like, nope. We got free Starbucks, and we drank coffee, and we worked all day. and really, it was kind of what it was. But they were checking on you to make sure that you weren't going to have some kind of, you know, mental issues or emotional issues, because there are some people who saw some pretty bad stuff, and they were worried about that. But for me, it was like not a big deal, not a huge deal. It was just, something to happen.
Do you still fly at all?
No,
No.
not anymore.
So what led you to teaching then?
Well, I wanted to come back to Clemson, so, which has no interest, I'm sure, to the Library of Congress. But I mean, I'm not a graduate from here. My dad went to school here. So when I was enlisted, I was in South Carolina, and then I got commissioned as an officer, and I left for 15 years. I mean, I came back to visit, but I was gone. I mean, I lived in the desert of Nevada, lived in Florida, lived in Ohio, back to California, and I missed South Carolina. When I would always fly into Atlanta and get a car and drive up 85, and go over the bridge, and boom, you're back in South Carolina. And as I got older, I was like, I really missed being here. So this job at Clemson opened up, and so I lobbied pretty hard to get it. I got real lucky to have it. I'm not actually supposed to be here right now. So, but through another happy series of events, I was able to get this job. And partially it's because I just wanted to come back to this place. This was the only way I could do it. And it turned out that this is an absolute blast doing this job. Because it's not like the normal professor-student relationship. It's different because the kids that are in my class they're not just taking the class, they're trying to join our group. They want to be commissioned into the Air Force as an officer, and that's a different thing. So we actually develop a relationship with the students. We get to know them pretty well, and you pour your heart and your soul into a lot of them, and it's a very emotional and emotionally taxing kind of job because you care about them. You want them to do well and all that, and they don't always. It's like having kids a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. I mean, you really do. A lot of days I go home just tired, emotionally pretty drained from the interactions that you have with your kids. Because I have about 60, right now about 55 freshmen, and that's a lot of kids to deal with and to on a real, and have a real relationship with. It's very rewarding, but it's also pretty taxing at times, but it's a blast.
So looking at kids going through Air Force training now, would you say it's very similar or different than when you did?
It's just different, a different animal, because this is a 4-year program, and the program I went through was 3 months, so it's very different. As far as are the kids themselves different? I'm not sure. Probably a little bit.
Well, do you think the fact that, wars are getting more intense almost is also changing how their training's going?
Well, not really. It's good that we're still getting interest. It's not like people are, like there's a war on, I'm not going to join. We still got a lot of interest, and some of these kids are really awesome. And that's the thing, a lot of people don't think some people have the misconception that the military is a fallback. If I can't make it somewhere else, I'll go there. Or and maybe in the past there was a little bit of that, but it's not like that in the Air Force, especially not now. We take a pretty high quality person, especially in the officer corps. But across the board in general, the Air Force is made up of some pretty high quality people. We get some people that are just they're not only good, they're outstanding. They'll blow your mind a little bit. Seriously, I've got an example of I know a guy who went to the Air Force Academy, which is highly selective. It's hard to get in there. There are only about 1,000 kids that get in there a year, and so when people across the whole country are trying to get in, the 1,000 that get in are good. And he graduated the #1 cadet out of 1,000, #1. And then he went to pilot training and graduated in the top of his class. And then he went to Eagle F-15 training and graduated in the top of his class. And then he went to test pilot school and graduated in the top of his class. And now he's an astronaut. And it's just like, you look at this guy and he's highly capable, he's highly intelligent, he's the nicest person you ever meet, and he looks like he's 12. He looks like, I'm not even kidding. He was stationed with me in Las Vegas, and he flew F-15s, which are huge. And I was in F-16s, which are about half the size, sort of. Like, you know, you park like this on the ramp, and he'd be parked like this. And so one day we were sitting there, and they have to take the pins out of your airplane because you've got missiles and things like that, and they have pins in them to keep them safe. So they pull them out before you go fly. So you pull up, and they come pull your pins out. So we're just sitting there, and they're pulling our pins, and this guy pulls up in his airplane in the F-15, and it's him. And he's got his mask hanging down. I look over at him, and he looks literally like he's 12. And I was talking to the guy I was from. I was like, "There's a freaking high school kid in that airplane next to us." And he was 30, and he literally looked like your age. You know, so this guy's got everything going for him. And there we have, you know, multiple examples of guys like that. I mean, he could be out in the civilian world making $17 million a year because he's that capable and that smart, and he chose to do it for a whole lot less. You know, in the Air Force, and we just get to work with those kind of people all the time. That's the best part. I mean, that's the thing that you'll probably hear over and over and over again, is that the people are what really keep you kind of come back and happy in your job. I mean, here, you know, my current boss is the best boss I've ever had. He's awesome. You know, I never question the fact that my boss has my back, period, because I know he does, and it's a nice way to go through, you know, my career, a 28-year career, having just working with these awesome people.
So how would you say, this is a broad question, but how would you say serving has really affected your life?
Well, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. But, you know, bar none, other than getting married to my wife. I mean, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. That moment when my dad's like, you know, actually my dad got mad, my mom came in and was like, if you don't do something, he's going to kill you. Like, okay. And she didn't mean it, but, you know, that started me out, you know, and I enlisted and had no thought past anything. I mean, I signed up for 4 years, but I wasn't thinking 4 years down the road. I was thinking like 15 minutes down the road, you know. And 28 years later, you know, it was absolutely the best thing that ever happened to me. You know, I think I'm probably a better person, a better quality person than I would have been had I taken another path. You know, I honestly believe that.
Well, that was a lucky day that year.
It was a very, very lucky day. It really was. I mean, I feel like I've been very blessed. You know, it hasn't all been great, it hasn't all been fun, but when you add it all together, the pluses are up here and the minuses are way down here. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you know, that's why as a recruiter, I love being the recruiter here, because I'm passionate about this university. You know, being a second generation Clemson Tiger, but I'm also passionate about the Air Force and Air Force ROTC. So when kids come in with their families and stuff, and they're like, well, tell us, why should we be here? I'm like, well, I'm going to talk about now or right now, because it's, you know, there are very few downsides. I mean, it's not for everybody, but if it's the right thing, then, you know, these kids have no idea the positive experience they're getting ready to embark on, really. I mean, I can go out and I could go find, we have about 115 kids right now. I could go find you easily, and if I could go pick the ones I want, bring them in here, and they tell you the exact same thing. You know, I've got one girl, she came here as a freshman in computer engineering, didn't even know ROTC was here, found out about it by accident through a roommate or something. And was like, well, that's kind of cool. And she joined, and she told me last week, she's like, I could not imagine being here without this program. It would be just such an awful thing for her to have not gone through this. You know, she's getting ready to go to pilot training, and she couldn't be happier, period. You know, I mean, it's been that great of an experience for her. And she hasn't even been commissioned yet, you know, but she's going to go off and she's going to get to learn to fly jets. And, you know, it just doesn't get a lot better than that when somebody's that excited about what's getting ready to happen. We have multiple kids that are like that. They're like, this has been the best thing that's ever happened. And they just started. You know, it gets better. You know, and so it's just, it's been, you know, I can't say enough positive things about this place and the program and stuff. So it's easy for me to recruit. Right. Yeah, and it's just fun.
Good job for you.
Yeah, it is a great job. Yeah, I've absolutely loved it.
Well, thank you so much for your service and helping others serve as well.
Yeah, well, thank you.